Hello, my name is Emily Corey-Pryor, and I'm the Executive Director for Data2X, who brought you this video. So data, it's the cool kid on the block right now. It's fantastic, and it's a little surreal if you're in this field. And it's eminently logical. We use data every day to make decisions large and small. But the danger of getting cool is becoming uncool and losing momentum on something that's not just a passing fad, but is an essential part of our collective success. That's what I want to guard against, and that's why I'm here today. We're all in this room because we care about the Sustainable Development Goals, global progress, and the camaraderie of being around fellow-minded world changers. But we are not going to change the world if we do not achieve gender equality, and that is not for the faint of heart. It's going to take time and commitment, policy change, money, and yes, data. If we do not improve our ability to measure the change between today's reality for women and girls and their reality 15 years from now, we will not have done our job. Data2X has shown that much of the data we collect and use globally is missing or is misrepresenting huge pieces of information about the lives of women and girls. And this is a big problem because if women and girls' contributions are not counted, then they are not valued. We've identified 28 global data gaps, and we're building partnerships with UN agencies, civil society, governments, and the private sector because we need this data to develop smart policies and programs and in order to meet the world's bold promise to leave no one behind. I hope that with this video, we've added to our fan base. So get involved, share this video, help us keep gender data on the agenda. And look at the data and statistics that surround you every day just a little bit differently. Data's powerful. We need to ensure that it is generating power from everyone and that the power of data can be used for everyone. We hope you'll join our gender data revolution. And now it is my pleasure to welcome to the stage Jean Case, Shazi Visram, and Kerry Flynn for a conversation on changing the face of entrepreneurship. Thank you.
Well, Jean, Shazi, thank you so much for being here today, and excited to have this great conversation about inclusive entrepreneurship. I'm sure you guys have seen we've already had such a diversity of guests here today at Social Summit, and that's really the conversation that we want to talk more about. So before we start, I'm sure people are pretty familiar with their stories, but just want to give them a brief background. Here we have Jean Case. She co-founded the Case Foundation with her husband, Steve Case, back in 1997. And you guys are focused, again, on inclusive entrepreneurship, but also innovation in a variety of sectors. A believer in all things that technology can really change and power the world that we live in. And so in terms of those innovative efforts, we've seen you collaborate really on having exponential impact in so many different ways. In addition to your role as CEO of the Case Foundation, you sit on several boards, the National Geographic Society Board, the Accelerated Brain Cancer Cure, White House Historical Association, and the BrainScope Company. And you also sit on the board of Harvard Business School, Stanford Center, and Georgetown University's Barrick Center. And in addition to what you do there, you joined the Giving Pledge back in 2010.
We did, yeah.
And so that's wonderful. That means that Jean and her husband Steve have committed to giving away the majority of their fortunes to charity throughout the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. And here's to that. And we also have Shazi here, and really appreciate you coming out today. You're still on maternity leave, from what I understand. You just have a 9-week-old child, so congratulations, and we really appreciate you coming out today.
Thank you.
So Shazi, I understand from as long as you can remember, you really were committed to wanting to do something much bigger than yourself. And that realization came when you were in Columbia Business School back in 2003, and you started your company shortly thereafter. Shazi runs Happy Family, which is a company committed to providing baby food specifically and helping mothers and families worldwide with healthy alternatives to baby food. It's a realization she had before she had a child, with many of her friends saying that they really couldn't find time to make their own food or other alternative options, other healthy options in stores. So you had this moment, but you didn't really have the capital to take it on. So you took a lot of risks there. And that's something that I really want to touch more with you today. So could you really take me back to, from what I understand, you're the daughter of immigrants who really committed a lot to helping you change the world. And I want to know, how did they inspire you to be the entrepreneur you are today?
I think that's a great question, because as we discuss inclusive entrepreneurship and really what makes entrepreneurs successful, I think back to my parents, and I think one of the key things is having real role models. And immigrants, if you think about it, are kind of the ultimate entrepreneurs, because they're not necessarily just the general subset of a country that comes here. It's like they're actually the risk takers. They're the exceptional ones that are leaving everything they're comfortable with to come here and do something bigger than themselves as well. So I think the thing my mom and dad showed me the most is that no matter who you are, no matter what resources you have or don't have, if you want to accomplish something, you work really hard, you take risks, and ideally, and in many cases, you have success because hard work is repaid. And I'll tell you, when I came to America when I was 3, I lived in a motel in Fultondale, Alabama, in a motel room for the first, just so you guys can really understand the picture, the first, almost 6-7 years of my time in the US. And now, just fast forward, Happy Family we're a meaningful sized business. I would say like 150 million this year. Literally started from scratch in my kitchen in Brooklyn. And of course, my husband and I now have a pretty good life. But even when we were starting, we were struggling. We lived in a tiny apartment. Every day was a struggle. But I think access to finances are really important, or the financing. And being able to raise that first 550 was critical, and keep raising it. But it was also having this role model, and my mom and dad, seeing what the risks they took in order to make something happen that young women need. So yes, we need access to data. I'm sure we'll talk about it, and that was a great segue. But you also need access to people who believe in you, who are mentors, and who are role models. So I think that's the thing about an immigrant background, is you get the ultimate role model. And I bet if you did the data, second-generation immigrants are pretty entrepreneurial. My guess is,
Well, there is good data, actually. About 40% of the Fortune 500 were started by an immigrant or a child of an immigrant. So we're really a country that's benefited greatly.
Well, Jean, tell us more. Obviously, you're well-versed in this space. I want to know about, from what I understand, the Case Foundation only recently started to really take on inclusive entrepreneurship. So what were you inspired by? Those data points, meeting wonderful people like Shazi? What
Sure.
really wanted you to take it on?
Well, as you mentioned, the Case Foundation actually is turning 20 next year. And when we came into philanthropy, my husband and I had private sector careers in technology. So it was a new space for us, and we didn't really feel at home. So really went to school. I've served as CEO since we founded it. Really went to school on the space, looked closely at the unbelievable, tireless efforts of social organizations, whether they be nonprofit, government, philanthropy, and were kind of blown away by the commitment people had. But we noticed something. There was something missing. And what was that? And that really was the voice of the entrepreneur, an entrepreneurial spirit. And when you think about it, in the social sector, we are taking on the most daunting challenges facing our communities, both here and around the globe. What we really need are some new ways to solve old problems. So I think our first sort of aha moment was, gosh, what can we do to make sure business and entrepreneurs are at the table in the problem solving with their ideas and with some of the new companies they're bringing forward? Okay, so that was great, right? We got really jazzed by that work and very active. But then we noticed something else was missing as we began to work with entrepreneurs across the space. And that was, in too many rooms, there weren't women present. There weren't people of color. In America, we have this growing idea, which is really sort of a myth we have to debunk, that all the innovation takes place on the coasts, whether that be San Francisco, New York, or Boston, when in fact, again, the majority of Fortune 500 companies have been started between the coasts, okay, and became really great companies. But we knew even some of our most celebrated companies today have either an immigrant entrepreneur or a child of an immigrant. So across the board, when we talk about inclusive, we are not just talking about women. We're talking about women, people of color. We're talking about people from non-obvious places that innovation comes from. And we just see it as a true opportunity to seize. It's not only a fairness issue, but think about all the cool stuff we've done in this nation with our entrepreneurs. But we've kind of been doing it with one hand tied behind our back, because 50% of the population has, for the most part, been left on the sidelines. And I'll just add two more data points on this to underscore it. VCs backed only 3% of women CEO companies. Okay, that's kind of the data. If you're African American, 1% have received venture capital funding. But even before you get to venture capital, we need to build social networks and sort of inclusive, almost approaches, if you will, in our communities to bring these great people with new ideas around innovation that can serve new segments. And we're jazzed by it.
Well, Shazi, add more of a personal story to the data points we were just talking about. I mean, you said you were inspired by your parents, but in terms of taking on the challenges, what really were the barriers that you faced? Obviously, you're like a woman of color, so two parts that we talked about here were really how did you overcome those barriers?
I mean, it's an interesting question. In my story, one of the things that I think that is so different about our world today is in all the prior generations, if you wanted to create a pathway to wealth, you would do it through education, right? And that's what my parents gave me is this. They said, whatever happens, we want you to go to school. We want you to go to a private school. And so I ended up going to Columbia undergrad, and then I went to Columbia Business School, which I didn't think I would do because I was like a visual arts person, so it was definitely not my world. I was telling you I was a black sheep. But for me, I took that path of saying, okay, well, I need to have these stamps of approval in terms of my degrees to be able to get the credibility I need. Because the reason I went to business school is that I knew I wanted to do something big, and I just needed different tools in my toolbox to be able to achieve that bigger than on a mom and pop scale. And so for me, kind of getting around the institutional bias meant, okay, well, how can I build credibility because I'm starting at a place that's not on a level playing field, in a sense with the white guy in a hoodie that we've talked about, right? Yeah. So, and in a sense, I think that was one barrier that I was able to overcome. And I don't know that that's necessarily the barrier for young women and millennials today, because I think access to all of the information they have allows them to not just focus on climbing the ladder via education alone. But for me, that was a big barrier, because I think once you have credibility, people listen to you. But even still, in terms of raising capital, it was really hard. And I can tell you that I've sat in many, many boardrooms and heard the word no, 10,000 times, the times I heard the word yes. And I think obviously you need to have that sort of tenacious spirit and be able to hear no a lot. But as a woman of color, what I would do is listen and think about the real questions that were coming at me. How could I create the strongest and best response so that my story was sort of airtight, watertight, bulletproof, so to speak. And that made me a better presenter and a better entrepreneur because I was ready to accept the challenges. So, I think that's what happens is those who are not given a leg up always, we're smart, we're resourceful, and we figure it out. And yes, my whole world has been organic baby food, but I believe in myself in a way that I'm sure a lot of entrepreneurs do. And I always say, well, it's not rocket science. But I'm telling you, if you told me that we have to build a rocket, I will figure out how to build a rocket, And I think that's an attitude thing that's come again by watching my parents, because yes, it was a motel and dry cleaners and whatever else they did, but for them, if it was to build a rocket, I know they would have built a rocket so my brother and I could get out of that motel room,
Great. Well, definitely the tenacity of your story, that makes so much sense in terms of the barriers of raising the initial capital. Like you talked about, friends and family rounds may be really easy for the guy in the hoodie who comes from a wealthy background, but a little harder for maybe someone like yourself and others who don't have those connections. So in terms of the Case Foundation and what you've seen, Jean, how else can people like yourself and other kind of investment firms help support these initial rounds and help maybe take a risk with someone?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to more than just the investment or the capital. Shazi made the point that, role models are really important, and I think we'll talk in a little bit about a new campaign we are launching in October to address, really to put the faces of entrepreneurs out there and to show that there are entrepreneurs in every size, shape, color, gender, you name it, and from all places. But actually, it's kind of, I think it's important to peel back the onion. I mean, Shazi, you're such a great role model, and you know that I love your story, and I love what you've done. And you know, you did have the benefit of that great education. But I think when we peel back the onion and we look at what does it take for an entrepreneur to find success, there are some places, almost a framework that we can work on. And so we're working with accelerators and incubators and investors across the nation to try to help them be a little more intentional and aware about what they need to be doing to end up basically with more of an inclusive portfolio. And I'll give you some examples. I mean, some of the hottest places a young entrepreneur might want to go, but it doesn't even have to be a hot place necessarily. You know, they do recruitment, okay? But how their view on recruitment is often you come to us and you kind of knock on our door. We really have to change that paradigm because many people in many neighborhoods are out there with great ideas for innovation, but they don't know that pathway. They don't know that roadmap, if you will, to where people are who can help them or vault them. Yeah. You know, we do pitch competitions around the United States and literally around the world, and too often, you know, we don't see the women and people of color being in the networks to know they're happening, to come and tell their story, to get mentoring support, to basically, you know, be the best they can be when they tell the story of their idea or their new company. And even in terms of program design, if you look at the way some of the accelerators and incubators that are there really to kind of hold up and champion entrepreneurs, sometimes they're not particularly friendly, particularly for those that come, say, from a tougher economic sector. So it really is looking across a series of things about, well, how does it work today, and how can we be intentional about changing it? And I think the good news is when you sit in rooms with those that are, you know, really sort of at the epicenter of championing entrepreneurs, you can really see something change when you begin to explain these things. So I think there's some unconscious bias going on. There's some obvious, I just didn't know, I didn't think about it. So some of this is really trying to inspire and educate and then activate them into backing inclusive entrepreneurs.
Great. Well, Shazi, have you witnessed that change yourself? So your business, you've seen it, you've been in the game for almost 10 years now. Yep. So in terms of, you know, maybe, was it harder 10 years ago? Is it easier these days?
Oh, it's absolutely so much. I'm not saying anything is easy. That's such a challenge, but there's so much access to resources now. I can tell you just two organizations that I'm involved with because I really believe in everything Jean is saying and just getting out there and rolling up your sleeves. One is called Rising Tide Capital. And what they do is they go into inner cities and they basically create almost like a boot camp MBA style program to empower inner city youth and young folks and older folks and, you know, of sort of every creed to put together a business plan. And then they teach them about these different, you know, grant opportunities, pitch programs, all kinds of things. So that just sparks the conversation and makes things seem possible. And I've seen so many more organizations like that popping up. Okay. But Rising Tide is a good example. And then even earlier, you're seeing, you know, this focus on empowering our children in our country so that they can understand the importance of taking control of their finances. And so there's Nifty. And I'm sure you're both really familiar with that. Happy Family or Happy Baby, we did a case study for Nifty, and this is kids in high schools across America. And then you watch your case study, and you basically are sitting there face-to-face in the classroom through a video monitor telling them that, hey, I did it. I lived in a motel room. You can do it. And what's your idea? And here's the story of my business. Let's talk about the challenges. Let's learn from my mistakes. And it is such a wonderful way to keep the conversation going at different age points. Great. And so to answer your question, I do think there's more and more out there to support this sort of inclusive entrepreneurship structure, but we still need more and more.
Yeah. Well, that's a perfect segue into what you mentioned earlier, Jean, about, I believe it's called, what you're launching in October, Faces of Founders.
Right.
So it seems to be, again, illuminating people's stories. So can you tell us more about that?
Sure.
And what exactly you're showing there?
Sure, well, we invite all of you to be a part of it. Faces of Founders is really designed to really sort of change the conversation and help people become aware that there's a great need to have a more inclusive base of entrepreneurs, while at the same time lifting up and celebrating entrepreneurs across the board. So we'll feature many, what Shazi referred to as role models, that come from a variety of communities. And any one of you can, if you're out there and you're an inclusive entrepreneur, let's say you're just a more traditional entrepreneur and you don't sort of have that inclusive set of characteristics, you can still come into the campaign. So the campaign will encourage people to say, I'm sort of standing behind inclusive entrepreneurship, and I love entrepreneurs, or I am an entrepreneur. And the whole idea really is to just kind of underscore the fact that we need a much more inclusive base to achieve the kind of, I think, what I call new ways to solve old problems, to broaden that tent. And I think that's something we should just touch on quickly, which is this opportunity to seize. Entrepreneurs at the end of the day solve problems, and they are best at solving problems they've lived or they've witnessed. So I think what we'll see as a result of bringing new people into the tent are new forms of innovation, and we're already seeing this. There was a pitch competition that I judged in New Orleans, and there was a young Mexican American, and he's built an app to allow him and his peers from Mexico to very easily help their relatives back in Mexico. Well, I don't think that's the kind of thing we're going to see coming out of Silicon Valley, okay? These people have to live problems to begin to build products and services that will solve them, and we're super excited by some of the new areas that will come forward.
Great. And any last words, Shazi, in terms of people in the audience today, how else what would you want them to take away in terms of how to really, have that tenacious spirit and be an entrepreneur like yourself?
I mean, I think really, this is so cheesy, but you just have to believe in yourself. I mean, I really do think half the battle is internal, and if anyone is thinking, hey, I have this idea, or I'm down this path, or I'm not really happy, in my current job, well, I would say, you owe it to yourself to find your happiness and to make your life work for you. And ideas have so much power, and if you have one, you need to believe in yourself, because it's your duty to bring it out to the world. And I'm eternally grateful that I've been able to do that with Happy Family, and that I've had people like my family or my husband in my life cheering me on, saying, you can do this. Great. There's no reason you can't. So that would be my.
And if you're in the audience and you're not an entrepreneur, but you believe in this, you see that there's value in that, think about, who do you know that's different than you are? Who might you come alongside of and encourage, champion? If you're an investor, who might you invest in? How do you begin to be intentional in your own actions to help change this picture? Because I think at the end of the day, it will make stronger communities, and I really do believe a stronger nation, and even address challenges outside of our nation across the world that have been untouched by innovation.
Great. Well, thank you both, and really looking forward to Faces of Founders in October as well. And I thank you both for taking the time to be here today.
Thanks, Carrie.